Very much for staying on. I am Pius Kojobaka. Government is linking the record third quarter growth to its commitment to check spending and raise the required revenue. It is therefore promising to institute measures to help sustain this momentum. There is more in this report.
The Ministry of Finance in a statement argued that the growth numbers also showed that government has been able to grow the economy, defying current global challenges and positioning Ghana as one of the most dynamic economies in Africa. It also showed the remarkable performance of the economy during the third quarter of this year. Government is of the view that based on how the economy has performed for the third quarter, Ghana will end the year exceeding the recently revised GDP growth of 4% under the IMF Programme. It further went ahead to argue that numbers also defy a country that has gone through debt restructuring, which normally grows at modest rate of 1 to 2%. The Ministry of Finance, however, promised that it will continue to implement programs that will help sustain this growth going forward. The Finance Ministry cites programs like the Planting for Food and Jobs, One District, One Factory, and the Ghana Cares Initiative as some of the programs that will ensure that this growth impacts on Ghanaians.
Meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund is warning government against being complacent over progress made under the fund program. The IMF in its staff report insists that there are still some serious challenges despite recent economic gains. George Yafe tells us more.
The IMF's warning is based on the fact that there are still some structural reforms that needs to be undertaken. These measures, the fund believes, will help strengthen Ghana's public financial management structures to help contain government expenditure. It also wants more attention given to the energy and cocoa sectors. These warnings are coming at a time that the IMF itself has described Ghana's program as satisfactory. It however noted that more work still needs to be done in the area of fiscal deficit as well as boosting revenue and checking its expenditure. Additionally, the fund wants managers of the economy to do more when it comes to implementing those reforms that would help fast-track the current economic recovery and put it on a strong footing in the coming months.
And then I want to bring in the thoughts of economist Professor Lord Mensah. Thanks so much, sir, for joining us on Zoom on this program. Now, looking at the statement released by the Ministry of Finance on the back of the GDP numbers, they say the growth we are recording is as a result of their commitment to check spending and, of course, improved revenue collection. Do you think so?
Yeah, for now, I would say yes, they have no choice because under the IMF program, the main, directive it was that we have to make sure we reduce expenditure and enhance revenue generation. And we have even provided, target, which we're looking at 18% to GDP of tax revenue, by the end of the program. So it tells you that, yes, indeed, we are on course as far as, the program directives are concerned. But the question that we have to ask ourselves is, is this growth inclusive, 2022, we recorded growth around 6%. We've been witnessing some jumps in growth. And if you look at the dynamics of, our growth patterns over the, past years after the COVID, it has been volatile. There's no consistency, especially in the agri sector. And you ask yourself, what type of growth is this? Are this growth induced by, conscious policies? Because if it's induced by conscious policies, then you expect the growth to be in a certain direction, and consistently we should see that. Again, if you look at the drivers of the growth as indicated by the statistical service, clearly it's mining and quarrying that is driving the growth. And you ask yourself how many Ghanaians are getting jobs in this sector. These are things that we have to discuss because as for the growth numbers, we've been witnessing them, and at a point in time, I touted the Ghanaian economy to be hanging without necessarily trickling down to the ordinary person, day in and day out. But if the growth was to be driven mainly by agri sector, we know that the economic benefit that comes if the agri sector, drives our growth. It has enormous economic benefit. That has to do with, the job market, the gain, food prices and all those. And if you look at the inflation numbers that has been coming out recently, you could see food is the one that is driving, our inflation numbers. So from where I sit, yes, indeed, it's a growth to satisfy the IMF program, but it's not growth for the Ghanaians.
And regardless of the position taken by the Ministry of Finance, the IMF is warning that government not to be complacent over progress made under the fund program, insisting, well, there are serious challenges despite the economic gains. Do you share that?
Yes, I do. Because, I mean, if you haven't this growth and the growth has not descended to the ordinary person, then obviously you need to be cautious. And you ask yourself, at what threshold of this growth would the economy get to the people? And so, I mean, it tells you that, yes, indeed, we are seeing growth in numbers, but then there are headwind, exposures that we may have to look at when it comes to, especially the political, what we call the election year spending and all those. We are yet to come out to see the numbers clearly. And usually in Ghana, the pattern has always been that when the opposition comes in, that is when we see the true picture of election spending. So let's see what comes out, when we enter into January.
And Professor Mensah, talk to me about the 7.2% growth we recorded. Impressive, looking at where we've come from so far.
Yeah, it is impressive. I mean, no doubt about that. Numerically, let me put it that way. But I mean, if you're looking at the growth in our lives, myself and you, I mean, our day in and day out consumption. Clearly, you appreciate that it's not growth that we should celebrate that much.
And what more must we do to sustain this momentum and, of course, consolidate the gains made so far as well?
Yeah, so if you look at, the growth on the expenditure side, clearly you could see it's government spending. And if you look at the production side, you can see mining and quarrying driving the growth. And that should tell you that probably the mining and quarrying, that's possibly the exports. That tells you that we are, producing these items to export without necessarily retaining them. Because if you relate that to key indicators that precede GDP growth, before GDP growth, you should realize some indicators. And one of them is, cement bag purchases, number of cement bag purchases. And if you go to Bank of Ghana's website, they have these indicators. They will tell you that cement bag purchases has been descending over the years. So if mining and quarrying is something that is growing our economy indeed, then it is expected that people will purchase, cement bags to complement, the quarrying stones, so that at least more buildings will be going on and all those. But here is the case: cement bag purchases are going down, sales are going down. So you ask yourself, is this because we are producing the quarrying stones and then we are exporting them? That is why we're recording the GDP growth. But probably it may not be, a growth that is, getting to the people as I've indicated earlier.
Thank you so much, Professor Lord Mensah, for your input this very moment. We truly appreciate it. Always a delight to have you on. Now, let's stay a while longer on IMF matters, because President-elect John Dramani Mahama has revealed that he will be pushing for an early engagement with the International Monetary Fund and World Bank over plans to renegotiate current programs with the country's development partners. He hinted that the discussions will be guided by proposals to reset the economy. The President-elect disclosed this during a meeting with the UN Resident Coordinator here in Accra.
Looking at the existing programs, we need to tweak them to meet the realities of today to do so. Happily, we've had discussions with the World Bank and the IMF already, and we look to an early engagement so that we can continue to be on the same wavelength. Of course, in the campaign, several, promises were made, and we need to look at what the reality is in terms of sitting together and seeing what the way forward is. Of course, one of our main concerns, and I think we've expressed it to you several times, is the issue of the humps in the debt repayments, and it's something we need to see how we can smooth in so that we don't default again. That would be more catastrophic than this current default.
Meanwhile, Associate Professor of Finance at Andrews University, Williams Prepra, believes there is still room for the incoming administration to renegotiate the current programs with the International Monetary Fund. He spoke earlier on the marketplace.
Tax policies that may have to affect the current tax strategy of the fund. The fund is saying that we should increase our tax rates. This current government campaign on cancellation of some taxes. I know that what the incoming government will be doing is be broadening the tax net and they're also going to reduce or cancel some taxes. So this must be aligned in that policy. A major one is expenditure reduction. That I am expecting that this government is going to propose that give us the room to reduce our expenditure. He's going to cut the ministers from 120 to 60, which is going to have a major tax expenditure savings. On the issue of how he's going to realign some of the ministries, which may lead to some job losses, and they may have to create room for that. And then also on their policy of 24-hour economy, it must find its way into the IMF program, and so that it may be able to get support from bilateral, multilateral donors to make sure that this policy works. Indeed, if the 24-hour economy really becomes successful, it's going to propel production, and it's going to impact, as from their policy, they talked about export. It's going to lead to export, which is going to bring in more foreign inflows and going to strengthen our currency. So these are some of the strategies that must find its way into the IMF document. So this is the reason why a renegotiation is more needed at this time.
Still on economic matters, Ghana is still classified as a high-debt distressed country. This tag could be removed after 2028. This is despite the significant progress made by government in restructuring its debt-owed creditors. More from George Biafe.
This revelation was captured in the latest report issued by the IMF about Ghana's performance under the fund program. It was this report that was submitted to the IMF board that led to some $360 million released to Ghana after it passed the test review earlier this year. It was the expectation that this classification will be removed very soon, as government had announced that it was about 90% through when it comes to restructuring the debt owed both the domestic and the external creditors. But the IMF, in the report on Ghana, argues that the country still has this tag due to the near-term breach of the debt sustainability analysis threshold. However, the fund has revealed that Ghana will reach that moderate risk of debt distress by 2028, when at that time all those targets set by the fund has been met when it comes to restructuring its debt. It is not clear for now how this classification will impact on the country's finances going forward and the cost of any fresh borrowings.
You're still watching Business Live. We have more stories for you after this break. Welcome back to Business Live. The Registrar of Companies, Jemima Oware, has advised banks and financial institutions not to do business with companies and non-governmental organizations whose certificates do not bear the requisite updated certificates required to demonstrate compliance with its new act. The Companies Act 2019 has introduced updated provisions aimed at improving business regulatory compliance in Ghana. Speaking at a stakeholder engagement in Accra, Registrar of Companies Jemima Oware cautioned financial institutions to desist from doing business with any entity that does not show the requisite certificates from the Registrar of Companies. More in this report.
Under the Companies Act 2019, Act 992, the Office of the Registrar of Companies is tasked with the registration of businesses and providing advisory services to ensure compliance with regulatory standards. At the stakeholder engagement, the Registrar of Companies, Jemima Oware, called on businesses to update their records promptly.
All businesses need to change the suffixes at the end of their names to make sure that as an office we're able to identify and distinguish the different types of companies that are registered with us. For a company limited by shares, you've been using limited with L-I-M-I-T-E-D at the end of your name. You have to ensure you change it to either LTD or limited company. For companies limited by guarantees such as churches, associations, clubs, they normally have foundation or organization at the end of their names. You need to change the N to be LBG or limited by guarantee. For publicly listed companies currently listed on the stock exchange that still have limited at the end of their names, you have to change it to PLC or publicly listed companies.
The registrar emphasized that maintaining up-to-date records is essential for businesses to remain in good standing and comply with the corporate governance standards.
For business names is over 500,000. But for companies, I think is a sample of about 5,000. If you have not filed your annual returns by the end of this year, we will put out a notice and find out whether you are still doing business. That process will run up to about 7 months. Those whose names are going to go off are those who we sent information to the beginning of the year, and so we are at the end of the year now. So if by the end of this year you haven't complied, that means you are not doing business. And when we take it off, within the next 12 years, you cannot have your name used by anybody until you go to court to have it reinstated. After 12 years, it falls in the public domain and everybody can use it. The import of this is when your name is off the register, we will put it in the dailies. We'll also put it in our company's bulletin. Anybody given a contract to such a person, you do so at your own risk.
The Office of the Registrar of Companies continues to engage stakeholders to foster partnerships that will enhance corporate governance and drive sustainable business practices across the country.
In more business news, the Ghana Stock Exchange has set next year as the deadline to complete moves to link stockbrokers in Ghana to other African capital markets. The move is expected to facilitate cross-border trading as well as give opportunity to Ghanaian investors to trade on other markets in Africa. Managing Director of the Ghana Stock Exchange, Abina Moa, has been explaining this to Joy Business in an interview.
So these are all for us very important tools to help companies raise capital as well as investors invest. On the global scale, as I said, the exchange itself is signing up to additional digital platforms that will help us avail investing opportunities across all of West Africa, across all of Africa, to Ghanaians that want to invest. There's nothing that stops a Ghanaian on these platforms from buying some shares in companies that are listed in Nigeria or Egypt or Johannesburg or Kenya, and the same for Kenyans, South Africans, Moroccans who want to invest on the Ghana Stock Exchange. So we are partners, or we are partnering with colleague stock exchanges. In fact, we've created and invested in some of these digital platforms, and as I said, hopefully by the end of next year, the stockbrokers will be linked to the program, and anyone who chooses a stockbroker that's participating in that program can buy shares across the market.
And we've got the very latest in the world of international business for you. Let me now take you to myjoyonline.com/business, where we have great stories on that portal there for you. Ghana's high debt distress classification to be reviewed after 2028. That's according to the International Monetary Fund. Also, that portal, proposals to review Ghana's program should be guided by ECF objectives. That is according to the IMF, warning Ghana for the matter. Also, on that portal, 7.2% growth for Q3 underscores government's commitment to fiscal discipline. And that was our big story we had for you here on Business Live. Proposals to review Ghana's program should be guided by ECF objectives, and Ghana's high debt distress classification to be reviewed after 2028, the IMF saying so. Also on that portal, Ghana's debt to GDP ratio to stay above 60% till 2027, S&P there. More stories when you log on to myjoyonline.com/business. Always a delight serving you. I am Pius Kojobaka.